So the first thing that I did for this project was determined exactly how long of a piece of twine I would need. The twine is what you actually use to tie all of the pieces of ribbon to. So I took it into my living room where I figured I was going to use it on my mantle, and I kind of wanted it to drape over the sides a little bit. So I just took the twine and draped it over the mantle in exactly what I wanted it to look like when it was done, and I came up with about 10 feet. But you could make this as long or as short as you want. In the clip right before this, I said that I measured it out and it was approximately, well, about 16 feet of ribbon total per foot of desired total length of garland. So this is me individually cutting each of the 8 pieces of ribbon to approximately 12 inches before I then tied them on to the twine just by tying them with a single knot. And even before that, at the very end, you may have seen me tie just a little bit of a loop at the one end in case you want to use that to hang it from a hook on the one side. I did not end up hanging mine from that loop, but I did want to show you that that's what you could do. I ended up using 2 command strips on the corners of my mantle so that I could hook the garland over. You'll see in the end pictures, but that held it up over the corners of the mantle. But if you wanted to hang it from end to end, you could add that little loop at the end by just tying a double knot with enough of a loop in it. So I continue cutting each individual piece, tying it on to the twine, and then I kind of wanted to just see approximately how much distance that took up on the twine so that I could get a feel for how many sections of ribbon I was going to need, how many sets of 8 overall. And I quickly realized that I probably wouldn't have enough of a couple of them, but for now I went ahead and tied each of these individual ribbons on, like I said, with just a single knot, and then clipped the ends of each bow, each ribbon, into a V, into a little V shape. So again, to reiterate how you can decide how much ribbon you're going to need, I was using all ribbons that I had on my ribbon shelves. I have a ton of ribbon, and I wanted to coordinate as much as I could using what I thought I had enough of. So like I said, I had 8 different ribbons, and I cut each one to a foot each. Pretending they were all the same ribbon, I would have then been using 8 feet of ribbon per 6 inches of garland. So double that so that you can see approximately how much you would need per foot, and that's how I got the 16. 16 feet of ribbon per foot of garland. And then you would have to break that down into how many different ribbons you want to use. Now that's an approximation. Some of these ribbons were 3.5 inches wide, some of them were 1.5. So they were all a little bit different, and it's all going to depend on what you've got total. But what you could do is use that first round of ribbons like I did, the first 8 ribbons, the very first of each that I put on, and see approximately how much length that takes up of your twine. And then calculate out, depending on how long you want the entire thing to be, whether you're going to have enough. So I just continued to keep adding ribbon down the whole length of twine. This actually was much more time consuming than I expected it to be. It probably took me a good 3.5 hours to do the full 10 feet of garland. By the time you do all the cutting, you do all the tying, you do all the clipping of the edges. Now, something else that you could do is use a special set of scissors that will kind of ruffle the end, like it'll give it a little rippled edge, and that will help prevent fraying on the edges, and it gives it a nice little finished look as well. There's a special kind of scissors you can buy to do that. I don't have any, so I went with the V, cutting the V's. It might be a little bit less time if you had a pair of those scissors, because then you could just cut them once if you have the right length. I made them 12 inches, but I did end up cutting them down a little bit, so that's where all the scraps came in that you see in the top left corner. But I was trying to get them all to be approximately the same in fullness, in length total, from one end of the ribbon to the other. So once I got all the way to the end, I tied another loop on the other end. And then I realized I had just enough, I had about 4 strips of one ribbon, that chevron beige and white, that I wanted to just kind of fill in a couple different spots. So I tried to find about 4 evenly spaced spots where I could slide the ribbon over and add that in, just to use it up, because it really wasn't enough to use on any project. So that allowed me to use it up and just add just a little bit of a pop of the chevron here and there. I also ran out of the original one ribbon that I had, so I found something similar and I finished it off with that. Some of the ribbons that I didn't have enough of, I did like every 3rd section with, instead of every section, and you would never know. So for this little bonus project of the little fabric pom-poms, I took some regular fall fabric that I just happened to have at the bottom of one of my bins and cut about 2 inches into one side of the fabric, and then ripped the rest of the way across. I'd say I did about 3/4 of an inch, 1/2 inch to 3/4 of an inch strips. And I did that about 5 times, so I had 5 strips. And then I started wrapping them around my fingers. And then when I finished one, I just tried to make sure that it was the full length of, the width of my 4 fingers, and then wrapped another one over it, and then continued until I had all 5 of them wrapped around my hand. And then I just inserted the blades of the scissors in through so that I could take my hand out, and I cut about a foot of twine, thin twine, and I laid what I took off of my hands over the twine so that it was right in the center, and I tied a knot right around the center of all of that wrapping that I just did. Tied a double knot real tight. Then I clipped off the ends, and then I clipped all of the loops. Sometimes you have to really dig in there to find them all. But I clipped all of those little loops. And then, once I had all of those done, I just kind of fluffed it up and trimmed and clipped all of the edges so that it was a pretty evenly shaped little fabric shaped ball, pom-pom. And I found that the least messy way to do that when I did all of the little trimming was to put it over a trash bag that I had been using and clip away. And that way it would go right into the trash. The reason why I wanted to add this little bonus project was because the technique used for ripping the fabric to get that really rough, frayed look could also be used to make the garland. You could cut wider strips all the way across the fabric and then cut them down into 12-inch strips and tie them onto the twine just like we did with the ribbon. And something else that you can do in the same fashion, except you don't have to cut strips, you can do one continuous strand, is to use yarn. Any kind of yarn should do, but I really like this one that I found at Walmart that's kind of a chunky yarn but not super thick, and I love the color of it. So I wrapped it around my hand about 25 times, followed the same steps, but this time I used just another piece of yarn to tie it around the middle real tight, and then I clipped it just like the fabric pom-poms, and it makes a super cute addition to a tiered tray or wherever you would like. It's a cute little accessory.